I just wanted to show you some examples from the fall on the Old English Anthology of some of the different word orders that we find in Old English. And actually the first dozen lines here contains pretty much everything that we would want to find. So I want to start with standard sort of English subject, verb, object type word order, and with a few examples. So the first one, line 1 here, we have the snake, as in here Seonadre was Yepre. Okay, so what we have here then is a subject with the verb to be, copula, and a complement. Okay, and obviously the complement means deceitful here. So the snake was deceitful. Okay, very much like modern English. Next one that I wanted to have a look at was here, Seonadre quath to them with. And this is then the snake spoke to the woman. And so this is the subject, Seonadre, the verb quath, and then a preposition phrase to them with. The very next sentence contains an interesting example. Why forbid God you? So I think you can quite easily see that we have here the verb, forbid, then God, the subject, and then eu, the direct object. So there's our first example of verb, subject, object order. The next line here, line 3, we have God behead us. So this is clearly subject, verb, object, and then we can see a complement clause afterwards. The interesting thing about the complement clause is that while the host clause has subject, verb, object, the complement clause has something different. So this is God behead us that we not eat, and then not we that tree not touch. So not we that tree not touch. So here we have the subject we that tree, which is that tree, which is the object, and then not touch, which is touch being the verb. So that was an example of subject, verb, object, and in the complement clause, subject, object, verb. This example here, witende, either, ye good, ye evil, translates as knowing you both good from evil. So here we have the verb knowing, followed by the subject, followed by the object good from evil. In line 6 we have something slightly more complicated. So if we look here where it says that wefer, this continues throughout this section using pretty much adverbials and subject-verb order. Then what we find is an interesting example of ditransitive construction using that wefer as the subject. So here we have selda, gera, wera. So this is gave her to her husband. So we have the verb give, and we have here direct object followed by the indirect object in dative case. Now obviously that's interesting because what happened in modern English is that we would put the indirect object before the direct object in a ditransitive construction. But because this is marked as dative case, i.e. it's marked for the recipient role, then the word order is flexible. We could have said selda, wera, hura, or something along those lines, where we have the indirect object in the same place as modern English. But like we're saying, this is about the morphology. The morphology allows the elements to move around, and this is a very good example of how that can occur. Obviously, the very next sentence here is here, at, that. And this is simple. Subject, verb, object. He ate it. Looking at line 7 here, Obviously in English we generally speaking would have the subject, verb and object, but this is an interesting example where we have here, there, both eyes were opened. So this is an interesting example potentially of a passive in Old English. Their eyes were opened. And that looks very much like it does in modern English. Note the morphology on. However, in the very next line we find an example of a different word order again. So here we have this sentence there, or this clause rather. So here we have they perceived or saw that he naked was. Typically in English we would have the subject he, and then was the verb, the copula, and then the complement would come after the verb. And this is quite distinctive in Old English, where you'd have he nakod, where we have the subject complement and then the verb. So going back to a ditransitive construction, whereas before we found that we had the direct object first, and there's a höre were, and there's an indirect object second. Here we have the verb, then the indirect object, the recipient themselves, and then we have fig leaf, which is the direct object, and that's repeated here. So made themselves breeches. So this is very much reflects a standard English word order. And notice that that's the next sentence, right? So here we have ditransitive construction in one order, and here we have the ditransitive construction twice in the more modern English order. So you can see again we have that flexibility of the word order in Old English. So most of the rest of the text between there and here is standard subject, verb, object. But here we have an interesting one because we have behid Adam hina. This is Adam hid himself. But here we clearly have the verb behid and then the subject, and himself is what's called a reflexive pronoun, and it usually comes after the verb as a direct object. So this is a classic example of verb, subject, object order. This contrasts really nicely in line 10 with where he says ich nakod, I am naked, just like modern English, and ich behide me, I hide myself, just like in modern English. Again, so we see that kind of flexibility, right? There is I hide myself, contrasting with the previous example with hide. So line 11 is just Adam, just God repeating the bit about why do you think you're naked and why did you eat from the tree. So here we have an example of where a ditransitive construction with a completely different word order. So the last ones we saw could be standard English, could switch the indirect object with a direct object, but here this one's completely different. So Adam replies, that woman that you me gave. So here we have that woman, direct object. You is the subject. Me here is the indirect object, the recipient, and then the verb. So we have direct object, subject, indirect object order. There are lots of other examples here. This is an example in an embedded clause with word order. So this one, I, you, and then commanded that you not eat. I, you, commanded that you not eat. So this is subject, object, verb, clause. Final example from this page. Just God is saying, giving his judgment here and saying in line 19 that you will have your bread and you will eat it until you return to earth, and then says of there that you taken were. So here we have what looks like another passive with the verb to be and a verb, a lexical verb, but they're in the other order. So again, there's that flexibility with respect to this new auxiliary verb that was coming up. So genomen were, taken were, with that word order. But then the rest of it is fairly straightforward, subject verb complement, right? So this says, because you are dust, and to dust you turn. There are plenty more examples like this that you can find in the texts. I just wanted to show you a little bit, and I hope that demonstrates the kind of thing that's interesting in this kind of study.